All right. Hey, everyone. Um, Looks like we don't have a big turnout this week, but at least we can go through a few things. Um, I'm going to share my screen. Everyone sees that, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully. Okay. All right. So to start off, we have some announcements. Main thing is, I think last time we spoke, we were in the process of moving over our website and docs. That's all over on AKS now, which is great. Thanks, David, and whoever else helped you there. I think Chris. So thank you for getting that moved over. Next thing is Steeltoe initializer. Come up some updates there. Obviously, we have the new versions of the recent releases, which was 2.5.2 and 3.0.2, are now available on Steeltoe initializer. And for 3.1, we're getting really close. Some big PRs have been reviewed and are about to be merged for our messaging and stream functionality, which is great news. And then we'll have moved to the next level, which is working with the data flow functionality. So that's coming along pretty nicely. Still hoping for RC1 in January is our goal. And then we also have Pet Clinic, which is now out there on, if you look at the link here, I believe it's, let me just go to the page. Yeah, the Spring Pet Clinic microservices, which is basically a combination of Steeltoe microservices along with some of the Spring components we're using. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that, Dave. I know that you kind of, or David, you talk about what's going on there.
So we wanted to create an application that highlighted all the best things of Steeltoe and Spring Cloud, and doing it in a fairly robust way. What I mean is, instead of showing individual components and this is how you do this and that, this is everything together. So one of the biggest things that you would see in there is the application is using config server heavily. And that's maybe not the most straightforward thing for a .NET developer, is like the application has very, very little of anything in app settings JSON. Everything's coming from a config server. And that's definitely something to get used to, but a very good highlight for that. So given that base version, now we're making some derivatives of that for Azure Spring Cloud and for Kubernetes. And then we have the Docker Compose one and all that fun things.
All right, that's a polyglot, right? Where we have.
Yeah, there's Java 3 microservices in there, and there's a Java version, a .NET version, and everybody plays quite nicely together.
Yeah, very good. Anyway, so that's out there. Good. You can sample it on the Tanzu application service or Azure Spring Cloud. I've been doing some scripts there, if I remember correctly. We have some scripts to deploy to each of these. I believe, I'm not sure where it is here, but.
Sorry, what are you looking for?
Were there some scripts to, oh yeah, it kind of explains it here. Just the scripts to deploy to certain environments. And then we have, looks like we have Thai, Docker, and I thought there was scripts to deploy directly to Azure Spring Cloud too, wasn't there?
There's a switcher branch. Go over to the Azure Spring Cloud branch.
Oh, there's an actual branch. Okay. Oh, here we go. Okay. Yeah. So there we go. So now this is the area of the script here for Azure Spring Cloud. Anyway, so this nice reference application to go check that out. And thanks, Tim and David, for taking care of that. And what else we got going here? So again, we have our current open issues, some good first issues. If you want to just take a look at Steeltoe and get baby steps involved, understand how some things work and at least get your foot in the door. So it's worth checking that link out. And also, which is, I guess I can go ahead and click on it. This just shows some of the ones that are currently tagged good first issue. And also we have the help wanted issues, very similar. Just some, maybe they're a little bit more difficult in some cases, but looking for help from the community. And releases. So we have some upcoming releases, like I just mentioned, 3.1, getting closer. The main highlights of that would be our Steeltoe streams with RabbitMQ, and also working with the Spring Cloud data flow functionality. So looking forward to this functionality coming pretty soon. Like I said, RC1 in January. Any questions about that? All right, and we have 2 other maintenance releases set. We don't have a due date right now. We just released 2.5.2 and 3.0.2. So this will probably be at least probably a month out, maybe a little bit more, depending on what we do there. We might even roll in the 3.0.3 into 3.1. We'll see how that works out. And here's the release notes for our 2 releases here that we just had. And some new events, blogs, and videos. Let's see. We have an initializer blog that's been in progress. It looks like it's getting closer. David is working on that. Hopefully this week we'll release that. I don't know if there's any update there, David.
Yeah, push it out the door.
Okay. So we're looking to get that out. And that kind of goes into describing, how initializer is used and how you can I guess, is it building it or just how it works in general, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit higher level. It just kind of touches on the deep stuff.
Okay. And then also have a blog around the reference app that we just mentioned, the Pet Clinic. That's also in progress. I believe that it might be released on a couple of different blogs, not Steeltoe blog, but we'll reference it there I think it's going to be on possibly Microsoft's tech blog, possibly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Tech community. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And this is just a recap. We have some of these sessions out here for our some of the updates we've had from on .NET sessions and our .NET Conf session recent from David Tillman. So take a look at those. Let's see what else we got going here. And then just some community discussions. Right now we have a bunch of getting started guides on our Steeltoe.io site. In fact, let me just go to it real quick. And get started. And so we have all these guides. One of the things is we're trying to update them. They're a little out of date. We've had some new updates, obviously the new initializers out there. And want to just make sure everything's still working well with the instructions we have here. One of the topics we wanted to bring up was the functionality of having a local development environment or having it with multiple, showing multiple ways of doing it, local, showing it on Cloud Foundry and possibly Kubernetes to come here eventually. So that's something we've been discussing. I know there were some topics around not having anything but a local environment. So I don't know if David, you wanted to discuss that a little bit or.
Sure. So I did spend some time. So the first thing is I'm refactoring, I guess, the getting started guides. Right now they're in mostly HTML and a little bit of C# and Blazor. So it's using Blazor's templates. And that's not a very collaborative way of doing things. So with our new docs site out there, I'm able to switch these over to Markdown. And then we can, everybody can collaborate on them and point out issues and all that stuff. So in doing that, I am realizing the size of maintenance that needs to happen. As you pointed out, the screenshots for initializer are wrong or outdated, really. And now we've gone on to Steeltoe 3. So that needs to be updated. We're moving on to .NET 5. So that needs to be updated. And then just generally, all the step-by-steps, making sure everything's right. and still works correctly and all that. It's like the Kubernetes stuff right now, a lot of it uses Helm to deploy some needed services and things. And, is that the right way? Helm's really changed the way they do things kind of recently. So, are we following the right way? My point of view was, let's get rid of the tabs and just go with local and leave it up to the beholder to see how to do this thing, whatever the getting started guide is, in whatever platform they want to use it in. But we'll give it to you in local form, and then you can go from there. For what it's worth, I've done this for a couple of them already, and I have to say the guides are amazingly simple because it's only local. So I kind of have that constant throughout each of the guides, and it just makes it very easy to do the step-by-step and I mean, just carry through, whatever you're wanting to do in that guide for what it's worth.
Yeah, I think the original goal is to show, all the areas that Steeltoe can work in, right? I mean, so that's what was brought up. Tim mentioned it. He's not on the meeting today, but he did want to discuss, that, I kind of agree. Like we started and we wanted to show all the area, or all the open source areas that it would work, right? So we had local and Cloud Foundry, and like I said, looking at bringing in Kates or something along those lines. The question is, how much overhead do we really have to, how much stuff do we really have to update each time? Like typically, for a platform like CF or Kates, we wouldn't have to like update these things very often. I don't know what the rest of the team might think, or does anyone out there have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I kind of see. Sorry, go ahead.
Let's say if the examples are truly simple, then local is, deploying the Cloud Foundry or Kates is not really adding anything because these are such simple examples. But if the moment you get something a little more complicated, that's where I think you're deploying to a Cloud Foundry or Kates is more useful. But I don't sound like that's not the purpose of these samples or these getting started.
Yeah, the overhead of maintaining multiple ones, if it's high and we're not able to give all of it, it's better to have one thing that works well, at least. And then Tim also talked about having like one page for each of these environments, and that might be enough. I kind of see the benefits of both sides, but it's sort of like a trade-off like everything else. So
Right.
When if you're dependent on some kind of back-end store, for example, it's a little more complicated. So you assume you have Redis running, or you assume you have Rabbit, or you assume MySQL, whatever. In those kind of scenarios, it seems like a Kates environment, it would be simpler. It's a lot easier.
Well, but the thing is, so like that's a good example, like the Redis one, the Redis connector. The getting started guide, even for local, gives you the Docker stuff to spin up a Redis instance.
All right.
So, and as you know, it's pretty straightforward to do, but it also gives you the guide. And if you want to try it out, it also gives you a guide for getting a Redis instance going in Kubernetes. And that's a little bit more involved because you get into your ingress, right? And how do I get to the right IP address of that instance, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So
yeah, it seems. So I think sticking with local, there's nothing wrong with that. If you're going to pick one, I think that's the one. An alternative would be to do everything with a local running Kubernetes. I don't know how much more additional work that would be, but I think this is a good starting point, is get everything in local and simplify the docs so that you get rid of the tabs. And it's, at some point when down the road we want to change local to Kubernetes, for example, then we do that then.
right.
But having N of them, I can see that's not really the purpose of this is not to teach you Cloud Foundry and Kubernetes and all that other kind of stuff.
I mean, they do things differently, right? Though, right? I mean, like, so if you're getting started and it's not just, you're not getting started just with Steeltoe, you're getting started with Steeltoe on Cloud Foundry or Steeltoe on Kubernetes, then now you have a getting started guide that kind of is similar across the board, right? Except this is just how you deploy it is different, so
maybe each sample is just different. You pick the easiest one for that particular sample. So most of the times they'll be local, and for some reason it's more complicated. Like you have like some Cloud Foundry knowledge. Your example is Cloud Foundry specific, but you don't have to worry about local.
Well, then I want to keep some amount of uniformity between all the guides. And it's like if one guide is doing it for Cloud Foundry and another guide's doing it for Kubernetes,
it's
I'm
hard
not
to follow.
agree with that.
It'd be hard to follow for somebody who wants to touch those different areas, right?
Because I mean, the point of this was when I created the guides originally was to keep them super simple and only show that little bit of functionality, that component, right? Don't show anything else. Because then we were leaving it up to the reader to say, okay, well, I want to do discovery and config. So I'm going to look at both of these guides and I'm going to put them together, the both of them. But if one of them were for one platform and then one of the guides was for another platform, it'd make it a little bit harder to put them together. If you scroll down here, Jason, and you go to run the application. So obviously for local, it's pretty easy. There, for Cloud Foundry, you've got quite a few steps because you got to add in some other packages and you got to get a manifest going.
Right.
So it's like, there's a good example of local is like, look, just run it.
Mm-hmm.
But on Cloud Foundry, you got to do this other stuff and then CF push it and all that.
Right. So like, how do we show the user the easy way to run it on Cloud Foundry without having this tab, right? Like if I'm a user and I want to just know how to run this on Cloud Foundry, this is very helpful to go through this and just, I'm able to do this, follow this guide exactly. And then, I can deploy to Cloud Foundry versus if I don't have these tabs, now where is that information at?
Yeah. And I guess the assumption is like learning how to publish an app to Cloud Foundry is up to you. And Cloud Foundry has plenty of, guides to do that. We're just going to show you how to build the application.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a drop off there. I think if we pull that out, there's a big drop off. Like, I don't know, is this really something that we had to update a lot? Like, is this, this seems pretty straightforward, right? I mean, we might have some minor updates here and there if, between major versions, but in the end, it feels like most of this stuff will stay pretty solid, all the way through. I think when you move towards a new Markdown way of doing it and having that ability to edit, someone can edit the page and create a PR for it, nice and easy. I think that's also a nice way to keep these things up to date, right? So if someone tries it.
So something else that I noticed, you're right, you're absolutely right. As Markdown, it's much easier to collaborate. The Markdown with each of these tabs, with the content of each of these tabs in the one Markdown file, it makes it very difficult to read the file. When I cut that stuff out and I just had the local examples, man, the files were like under 100 lines. They were so easy to read and just so easy to understand.
Markdown engine you're using doesn't support file import, I'm guessing maybe.
The docfx you can import from other files. So
that might help it.
Well, then you've introduced, for whoever is looking to collaborate, and I'm actually, that's a totally reasonable thing. I don't want to deter that, but we have introduced whoever wants to collaborate has to understand docfx will bring all of these files in. So when they went and looked at the master markup for this guide, all they're going to see are a bunch of include statements.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then you got to go over to that file and find that. Not a huge thing, but something.
That's pretty, more obvious, I think, to know that it's importing a file and where it's located. So it's not that, I mean, that is definitely a nice way to do that and probably makes the most sense.
It is nice that there's no barrier to collaborating as long as you have a simple text editor.
Yeah,
to install
I'm telling
DocFX.
you, the,
That's a,
the ones I
Big
made
step.
with local, I was just amazed at how simple they were. Really liked it.
I just feel like I know it's a lot to maintain, but at the same time, if we make it easier, and like you said, you're pulling it to Markdown, which is going to definitely simplify this. Um, you know, it could be a team collaboration, not necessarily just putting it on one person or anything like that, right?
like long-term, who supports this? This would be part of the team proper, correct? Right?
Exactly. Like when you update your docs for updates, then you'd also update the getting started guides. That would just be part of the process.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So that's kind of why I was saying, I think it's nice to have this. I think once we get that framework there, where like if you want to use the includes or whatever you want to do, or have separate docs for each one, like this is, you know, maybe there's something up here that says, you know, on Cloud Foundry or on, what were the other ones we had there? Kubernetes, you know, where you just click it and then it's a full doc that's separate, or we have the use the includes option, right? So all those things seem to, I think the includes makes the most sense from just what we're saying, but I don't know. I think we still should have these tabs. I think they're helpful. Maybe we can reduce some of the ones that are not open source, right? So we just specifically be local, you know, open source Cloud Foundry and open source Kubernetes, and that's kind of what we stick with. I don't think we should grow into like any platform, you know, opportunity there. My personal thought. I don't know, since we all are open source here, right?
Right.
And that'll really reduce it significantly to really only those three things at the most.
Do all these examples here, Dave, have roots in the samples repository? Is that where they sort of the genesis?
No,
No.
I wish. That was once we had moved over to DocFX and I had the ability to maybe include code snippets from something in the samples repo in the getting started guides. That was kind of my pie in the sky. I hoped that we could get there, but it's, you know, it's a significant amount of markdown that it's going to take to get all that done and coordination between that repo. And I was like,
Sure.
I just need to get these to markdown first.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of a workflow, like ultimately getting these docs updated. You make some coding changes to the Steeltoe proper repo, and then maybe you can go over to the sample, see if you need to change that. If you need to change that, then you probably need to go change these docs too.
Well,
what's that sort of work, that process flow look like?
yeah,
It's so
Yeah.
easy just to forget about these.
yes, I know. The cool thing is DocFX gives you this cool option where in your file, whether it be a CS file or a bash file, PowerShell file, YAML, any one, it gives you the ability to put in placeholders, a beginning and an end tag to a placeholder.
Mhm.
And then in your markdown, you reference that placeholder. And when you compile the DocFX site, it goes and retrieves that code, those lines of code, and brings it in and writes the HTML with all that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So it's like if you change something in the samples and you do it within these markers, this beginning
Right.
and end tag, and then you go back and recompile the doc site, it will get those same updates.
Well, would it be fair to say that if you've got a document here in these getting started guides that doesn't have a sort of an analog in the samples, then maybe the samples is missing.
No, they're totally disconnected.
I think the problem is that the samples are not complete. I think we've had discussions on this in other contexts too, but it does seem that if the samples were replete, that would make this process a lot easier, or at least go a long way to automating it.
Right.
You're saying what now? To
I
have
think-
go ahead.
I think like there shouldn't be any. It seems odd that there would be an example in the getting started guides that David has put together that don't have some kind of like an original example that was in the samples repository. If it's in the getting started guide, it should have been in the samples repository. And the fact that there isn't one, I think that highlights that the samples repository is missing something for that particular function or component.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would you,
So the fix is really to put it in the samples and then pull it down the workflow into the getting started guide.
so would you, does your thoughts go to the getting started guides are super simple, meant at implementing a single component in a very simple way, ideally using initializer. So what you're saying is whatever the result would be of that getting started guide, whatever CS Proj is the result of that getting started guide, that is a part of the samples repo. That's a folder in the samples repo.
I think so, because the samples is the place you're going to go. That's the first place you're going to go as a coder, right? To kind of cut and paste code, cut and see exactly, or bring a project. The getting started guide is nice because it takes sort of the code, but then adds a lot of prose around it to kind of give some
Sure.
context of why you're doing this. The samples repository is really just, they're very simple in terms of like the prose around the samples themselves. They're primarily code and projects with a little README to show you how to set it up, but not much beyond that. Whereas these guides are much more user friendly. They're web friendly, and then they should kind of pick out the pieces of the code from the sample that are salient to that particular, I guess, part of the getting started guide. But we don't. It seems to reproduce replicating code snippets in both repositories. They're never going to be in sync. And you're always going to be. I think someone's always going to be pulling their hair out and saying, "I forgot to do that."
Right.
Why is this not in sync? And anytime, this is the DRI principle. And if there's tooling out there that can sort of tie all these together, it might be worthwhile investing in that rather than trying to maintain two separate documents. Basically, they're both documentation repos, right? One's very code specific and one's very web friendly specific.
And one's a step-by-step guide, and one is a, here's the information, what do you want to find, that kind of thing. Like it's more just
And
general.
the sample is nice. I can check out, and I can build it, and I can run it, but it's not really set up really well for having nice documentation around it.
Yeah. There
I
it
think
is.
I think each guide, in general, I mentioned this to David before, at the top here should be like, here's a reference section, which is just point you to a sample that we already, uses Redis, or just giving an example, uses Redis service connector, and then it also has like the documentation on the Redis service connector, all that stuff's just at the top, right? So then anybody can dig a little deeper if they like, or they can follow this guide and just get a basic understanding of how it works, right?
Yeah, so Dave, I understand correctly, right? I'm just about these markers you're talking about. So using this example, so Jason highlighted the link above. You click on that, you go to the samples repository, the Redis. But the start part here, where you're starting the Redis instance, these all could come out of the README from that same repo. Because that repo, if you're right.
Yeah, you can do some magical things there. Yeah.
You can pull it from the README file. I see what you're saying.
I think it's just a text. It sounds like you just give it a file and a starting and ending sort of demarcation points, and it just takes that stuff out blindly.
So yes, for someone that doesn't understand the structure of all this, that wants to help make a change, it's going to be tough if you get that fancy. Because they're going to have to put together, oh, well, the text is in the getting started guide, but it's not in the documents repo. You got to go to the getting started repo, find the README. There, it's pulling out that little bit of text right there to display it on the page. So functionally, totally makes sense, but just making it easy for others to collaborate on it, you're going to have to line up the dots to make the right change.
Does it make more sense to just have the READMEs be the getting started guides instead of, or is that too much? Is that too? We don't want to give those kind of steps, that level of steps in the.
Well, you get into the markdown. DocFX knows more about markdown and can parse more things than GitHub markdown can.
Mm-hmm.
So there would be things like if you wanted to do tabs, for example, or that note and tip, if you want to do those things, DocFX knows how to parse that correctly. But if you did that in a markdown file, like a README, and put it on GitHub, it would just show you the raw, it would just show you the gibberish, because it doesn't know how to parse that. So there's some oddities there.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, so just in general, let's try to at least get an idea of what we want to do here. So obviously, you know, the local is very important. There's no question about it. I think the tabs are still important, but I'm willing to listen, you know, which direction do we want to go, you know, as a community and as a team from moving forward here. Do you think it's worth pulling those out for now? Or is it something that we should tackle at this point and keep them alive the way it is now, and then just move it over to Markdown like that?
And to help everybody make a decision, the current state of it. So I took the getting started guides in Blazor. They're there now. I just locally branched off the main site repo and gutted the website, like totally removed almost everything, every page out of it, and made the template, the component templates that like output all this nice step-by-step everything. I changed them to output Markdown. So like these tabs, as you're looking at on the screen here, it just dumps a bunch of Markdown out that would create that in DocFX. So basically I'm able to load this page and get the Markdown, this page is Markdown. That was the result. So I can just leave that, right? We don't have to change that. I then took that and moved it over to the documentation site and had to clean up the Markdown a little bit and help things out and do some stuff. And the result is the getting started guide with just the local, no tabs, just, you know, just take what's in this tab right here, this local tab, and just replace the whole thing with just that one step. That's the result right now. And I'm making my way through that. All of the Markdown for other tabs still exists. We can still get to it. It's not gone anywhere. So, I just offer to you that this is kind of the road that I started to go down, but if we decide something differently, I'm happy to change gears, or I could continue down this road and then we can go back and get the Markdown for the other tabs later if we wanted to. Thoughts? Anyone?
I think we got to start somewhere. If I do think the tabs is important. If you're already going down the path of, I mean, if you're not, do you not have a? I'm trying to organize my thoughts here. Do you have? So you're already removing the tabs at this point. You already started down that path. Yeah. Okay.
But I can go back. I mean, it's a little bit of work, but I can go back if we think it's the right thing.
Yeah.
But what if in the samples there were readmes that were specific to local Cloud Foundry Kubernetes, and you pull those in to create the tabs that way?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about too.
I mean, I understand, like, there's this balance of keeping it simple, but we also have to function. Good looking website, that's just part of the table stakes these days.
So
I think that what Jason said, maybe just do some prototyping here, and having given a presentation to the team and see what people think.
Yeah, because the Markdown in the document site would then be more or less just kind of the skeleton of just arranging the page correctly.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then the content of the page would live in its sister area in the samples repo.
Right.
Yeah. Or does it make sense just to leave it in the documentation repo and have a samples section inside there, like a folder that just has all the Markdown samples? Because these aren't running samples, right? Like these samples aren't running. These are just like you're going to be pulling pieces of the instructions out, right? Is that what?
Oh no, I was thinking that the samples would be fully working projects.
Okay, because we're generating them from initializer, though, right? So
yeah, it should be the result of that.
Okay, but then when, if initializer changes or anything changes there, then now those have to be updated.
I've actually not gone and looked at the actual code that deeply in initializer, and Audio might know better since he created the original. My understanding, or I thought, was that these were sort of created from the samples themselves or based on samples.
Whoa, was that a haiku?
Is Hanani still with us?
Yes, sorry, I didn't catch that. What was that?
No, when we created the initializer templates,
Mm,
were those taken in large part from the samples themselves?
no, some of them, it was, yeah, like, so Dave Deeroff was at that time working on, I guess, this site, and that kind of informed the initializer samples a little bit. But then we kind of changed tack partway through, because if you remember, we had the SQL server with all the models and all that set up, and then we're like, let's take a step back. We don't want to add all this stuff. We'll just add the dependencies and leave it at that. So it kind of changed tack partway through before I left it.
It doesn't sound like they're directly from samples, but
Yeah, they definitely had influence. Getting started guides had influence on that, Chris.
Yeah. So should we take two paths here? One is just maybe when you get to a point, David, where you have just a local looking page, and maybe we have one that looks, with the tabs and how we can set it up. I mean, or do we just go and try to do the whole tab setup and then pull in those docs, pull in the stuff from the READMEs? You want to try doing that path? So that seems like the more complicated one, but at the same time, if you have like a template for it where it's all laid out and you just pulling in docs, maybe that's just a good way to get it started and get an understanding of how it's formed and set up.
I can definitely put it together. It's, I'm days away from having all this moved over to just local, based markdown.
Okay.
If we do add that into it, that's going to add pretty good time to
Okay.
like generate all of these projects if we went this route.
Yeah, I don't think have to do all of them. Like maybe just pick one or two or one or two getting started.
No, I can definitely just do an example so everybody can see, but I'm saying if we decided to go that way, that's going to be a significant amount of work to get all that.
I think one advantage of maybe having a lot of the stuff in the samples repository, it might be easier to sort of divide the labor. So Dave, you're focused on the DocFX engine and the web facing side of it. And then if there's something missing in the samples, all you would have to do is kind of stub a file out and put some placeholders in there. And then it would fall upon, someone like Dave, and I know myself, Tim, to kind of fill in the missing stuff in the README or the markdown there.
Right.
And that way you're not stuck with both.
Yeah.
It's good separation of duty. Yeah.
And honestly, I've spoken to Ken, and I told him I wanted him to like actually go through these getting started guides and make sure that everything kind of flows for somebody who's relatively new to the project, and identify areas that are not correct, or maybe could make something a little bit smoother or cleaner. So he would be a good person right now to, if you have a branch, to work with him, and he can work in that branch with you, like collaborate on that branch or I don't know if you want to do that, or if you're at a point where you can actually just give him something that we can work with. I don't know the best path forward, but I have him kind of working on that now, like just going through the getting started docs that exist right now and showing where, what needs to be updated. And he's totally willing to help you out through that process. So I think that's a good spot, because he's newer to the project and can identify, things that might not be as clear to some of us.
Okay. All right. So let me put together an example of creating this separation of duty, as Chris pointed out. Let me put together an example there. I have a pretty good idea of how to get it done, and everybody can look at it. And then if we feel like that's the right way to do it, then I'll pull him in, and Ken, I'll pull him in, and we'll knock it out.
Okay, I'm just going to add you here. Put together, I guess, a demo of how would we set up? Is that what you're, would you
Yeah.
call it a demo or?
I would say that's a demo of markdown separation of duties.
All right.
We could also call that Chetham's version.
All right. Sounds good.
Did I say separation of duties or did I say labor? Did I say duties?
I think you said labor, but I like it when you say duty.
I like duties too. It has a Caddyshack kind of feel to it.
I'm glad this is recorded.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so I think we've kind of gone through. Anyone else have any suggestions or anything before we change topics? Okay. And then there is, so I don't know if anybody's aware of any upcoming, conferences that are happening or events that they want to be a part of. Obviously, I believe actually spring one's coming up soon. In the next couple of weeks is one thing. But I don't know if there's other ones that anyone has been keeping track of and interested in or wanted to tell the team about. Is there anything like that? Actually, I know another one is the radio is actually coming up that I mentioned in our room. I don't know if you guys are interested in putting a talk together or a research paper or anything along those lines for that. But that's something that's also out there. Any thoughts on that? Any interest? No? All right, very exciting. Okay. Anyway, so then the next thing is our API docs. Tim took a stab at this. There's been some requests for API documentation for Steeltoe. There is a repo out there that has some, the POC that Tim was putting together. Let me see, documentation. And there's an API doc branch that has like some details on how to set it up and everything. It doesn't look great right now. It needs some love. I was wondering if anybody either in the community or any of you guys have any knowledge of doc effects that want to take some time and work on some of this. Just it's more like, configuring it and trying to get it to make it look nice at this point. So I haven't seen what the output of this looks like yet. It needs to be built. But from what I understand, it's very complicated and hard to follow the way the docs are laid out and the packaging and that kind of stuff. So I'm not familiar with doc effects enough to give any good insight. But I wouldn't see if anybody was interested in helping out on that project. All right. So that's something that we need to tackle because we're getting some requests big time from other areas.
Is the effort, so this is one piece of DocFX that I haven't gone anywhere near.
Right.
And I think there's two different sides, and I guess Tim can answer this. It's creating the API doc, I don't know, I guess that's probably Markdown to describe it. But I was under the impression that DocFX can actually go to the C# and can grab, like, I don't know, maybe the XML, if you put some XML comments above each of the methods.
That's what it's doing. It's just, the output is crazy. There's like all these packages and like just lists and lists and lists of, I wonder if Tim has a picture. Let me see if I can find a picture here and I can share. But it was
so is that
very ugly. It was not readable. I mean, it's readable, but it's like not like easy to follow. So it needs to be configured. Maybe some other DocFX options to configure things like packaging and how to, it shows the packages and what's under them, like hierarchy kind of thing. Because right now it's just like seriously thousands of lines of.
So the XML comments and all that stuff is already in the C#. That doesn't need to be done.
It's being,
Right.
well, it probably needs to be like, we need to add more eventually once we get the output and we can see where some stuff's lacking. But yes, it is generating that.
So I guess the work is in DocFX, it has some built-in templates for how it builds a certain type of markdown file, like an API doc file. And like for articles and for the document, like the API, the Steeltoe documentation, I had to go in and overwrite those files and make them, more Steeltoe-esque.
Okay.
And I added a little bit of CSS styling and things like that fit the site. And that's how the docs got to where they are right now. And I'm assuming that that's the work to be done here is to overwrite those templates. You got to understand what you're doing. They're in Mustache. They're in that format.
Oh, what is using Mustache?
Mustache templates.
Oh, okay.
You got to go in and manipulate those.
Okay.
And it's
That's-
not straightforward at all.
I know some people who know Mustache stuff.
Well, the thing is though, you're doing DocFX's opinion of Mustache in those templates, and it's not very documented. Like the DocFX documentation is scattered and scarce.
Okay.
You just have to go in and figure it out and beat it up and try it out. I spent a lot of time.
Well, I know you looked at a lot of Microsoft's setup, right, for the docs in general, and then so is that some? I wonder if they have that expose how they generate their API docs.
That's another piece of how I got here is if you go in and look at the markdown for a lot of the Microsoft site, especially the documentation of .NET, all of that is using DocFX to be generated, so you can get a feel for what could be done. And I'm sure the API documentation is the same way. We could, go over to the markdown that's generating their API documentation, possibly even C# and get some ideas there. But it's involved. I'll be honest. This is not straightforward.
Yeah, it's kind of why we're looking for some assistance here. It's not. We just need someone to focus on this area. Okay. I just want to see if maybe just have to reach out to you, David, and get at least an idea of what you went through before for your site. Get that going.
Just because he's not here, after he's gone through the getting started guides with me, Ken might be a good option.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. Because he was already kind of looking into how some of these things were done, so I think he might be a good person to do that. So. Okay.
And he's not here, right? So
we can assign it to him because he's not here. Yeah. Well, I was hoping there would be more community members on here and we can see if anybody else had some familiarity with it. So, but it doesn't look like it. So, all right. Any other questions around that? Okay. Go ahead and move forward. Anything else, I guess, in general, want to discuss? Nothing? Nobody else? Everything else is perfect?
Yep, perfect.
Steeltoe rocks. All right.
Both.
All right. Well, I got a couple getting some action items here, and then one's set for you, David, and so some other things to look at here. So, anything else before we end the meeting? Okay. Thanks all for joining. Appreciate it. And talk to you all next month. All right. Bye.